I'm going to start. Great. Welcome, everyone, to Short History of the World, our 10th class, I think, of this semester. And we're coming into the final laps. There's still a little bit to go, but I can't help but say laps because we might see some pretty exciting chariot races from the great important, maybe the first metropolis in all of human civilization, the megalopolis of Rome. It's often called the first giant city in the history of human civilization. And so today we're going to really be looking more closely at this idea of what happened when Julius Caesar tried to seize power, and then how that resulted in something that we call the beginning of the Roman Empire and the end of the Roman Republic. So it's a very important moment in human history when we look at this time. And fortunately, today I have a lot of great action reconstruction from the company Faber Cortiel in Germany that is generally recognized as doing the most impressive Rome reconstructions around. And they've done reconstructions for movies. They may have done it for Gladiator. I'm not sure, but they've done it for other ones, definitely. And I think there's a new movie coming out by the director of Independence Day, a big American blockbuster that is set in Rome, and Faber Cortiel is doing the reconstructions for that. So you're going to see some very impressive, real vivid kind of life inside this city that is often called the Eternal City in the history of human civilization. So I'm really looking forward to taking you into the heart of Rome today, as well as trying to help you to understand why a civilization like Rome, which created a superpower around the Mediterranean, as you'll see in a moment, would eventually collapse over time. And there are many theories about this, but some even say today that what we're witnessing with the United States and its overreach and its hubris or its arrogance and its reliance on its military is in the beginning of its real decline. But that's another story. Okay, we won't get into that. But it's a very interesting time that we're all living in right now because the United States is really reaching for a global empire. And they have tried to capture Canada and make us a 51st state. They've tried to capture Greenland, and that backfired. They've tried to capture Cuba, and that's not going anywhere. But they certainly have done a good job from their perspective in Venezuela by capturing their president, who's now on trial in New York. So now we see the bombing, enormous, immense damage being inflicted upon Iran, who I think we could say deserves it, but it's a big problem for the world right now. And it may mean, if we look at the history of the Roman Empire, it may mean the opposite of what it might appear. It appears that the US is strong. Actually, when you rely on your military excessively, it's a sign of weakness. And that may be an interesting lesson for all the men here in this room, including women who might want to be like men. I don't know why they ever would. But when you rely too much on physical force and violence, it really indicates that you're afraid and you don't have much else to offer the world but violence and destruction. So, anyways, there's so much here in the Roman story to get into, but I'd like to go from essentially the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE or before the Common Era, and I'd like to take us up to the essentially the beginning of what I call a greater world, not spells of our God Kings anymore, but a greater world. And if I can get there today, that means we will cover essentially a period from about 44 BCE up into about 1200, 1300 CE, or the Common Era. So a few centuries in there, but they're critical times. So the end of Spells of Our God Kings, with the climaxing story of the collapse of the Roman Empire, and then a short little chapter on A Greater World, where we look at the travels of Marco Polo and the emergence of a new kind of human in the story, who's not necessarily violent and bent on conquering, but much more of an entrepreneur and a businessman who wants to trade with other countries. And that's what Marco Polo and other traders like him are going to do when they emerge a little bit later. So we are ultimately building towards, just before we review in a second, and we can start to talk a little bit, we're ultimately building towards next week's class, which may be the most important moment in human history. And that's when the two halves of the planet, the Eastern Hemisphere, everything east of the Atlantic Ocean, and the Western Hemisphere, are going to come together, when we're going to see the European explorers realize how they can get across the Atlantic Ocean, and they're going to unite these two halves of the world into what we often call the conquest. And that is when Christopher Columbus and others came over, and it's going to result in, essentially, the virtual decimation of the indigenous peoples in the Americas. And I think you're going to come to understand something of why we have so much attention being paid today to indigenous issues, because of the way that they have been treated by the European powers, colonial powers. And you're going to see a very stark story of what Christopher Columbus and others did, for better and largely for worse. So I'm just going to stop. We've got a lot ahead. And just to make sure everybody's on track, does anybody have anything they'd like to bring to the class, ask about before we? I think we can do a little review with Alex, and then we'll come to the story, and I'll pick it up with the emergence of Julius Caesar's adopted son, Augustus, who's going to become the first emperor. And it's a very important moment. But anything here, Jack? Any questions? You good? Anything on your mind this morning? No? Okay. Alex is going to come in a moment. We have a guest today, Noah, who's a friend of Maya's, who has dropped in. And I always welcome any friends, family. I've been doing this for years, who want to come in and are interested in the story that we're exploring. And
we have
he will
an
be
extra
absolutely
friend in the
welcome to join the
cosmos too.
conversation. And who knows, his insights may help us to generate even more insight together. Okay, so that's Noah. There's Ryden, Victor, Malagai. Anything, gentlemen, from you that you would like to talk about? You know that you have your second assignment that's due. Yeah, great. Next Thursday. Next Thursday, right? Thursday, April the 2nd. Good. Okay. Okay. So let's see. In the cosmos, look at this. We have Mantha already. How are you today, Mantha?
I'd love to tell you, but can you hear me?
Let's see if we can hear you. Hold on. Just a second. Sorry. Go ahead, Mantha.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah, great.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Go ahead. So how are you today?
I'm doing okay. I brought a guest.
You brought a guest? Who? A human or an animal?
That is definitely a human.
Is it okay? Because we've had dogs in this class, or we have had cats.
No, this one is a living human. I brought a friend.
Human. Does the human have a name?
This is Josh.
Hi, Josh. Great. Welcome. Excellent. Well, I love to see more people coming in, because it means you want to learn more about a story that has so rarely been told, but we can tell it now because of science and tech and modern historiography and world history, which is the story of the human race on planet Earth. And that is a story, historically, that is different from the history that a lot of you have been getting in your other classes over the years. This is the big shared human story on planet Earth. Okay, so, well, Mantha's definitely going to get her 5. She's with us and she can manage the live chat. And for any others in the cosmos, if you want your 5 for participation, the deal is you stay unmuted, or at least you're ready to unmute yourself to join the class. Okay, so let's move on then. And I think we should bring Alex up. Why don't you come up, okay, Alex, and take a microphone. And I'm going to help Alex do something, okay? I'm going to run the images that she has given to me, and she can tell us a little bit about what you've got. Excellent. Okay, so Alex is going to describe something really cool about her trip to Mexico that she saw. So go ahead and tell us what we're seeing, okay? And then,
if you don't mind going back to the map, I just want to.
Okay. Oh, sure.
Exactly
yeah.
where.
Great. I can do it. I can do 15 things at once, even though I'm 63. I'm learning. There we go. Great. Okay. So go ahead. Alex is going to tell us a little bit about her trip to Mexico. Okay. Go ahead.
So a few weeks ago, I went on a cruise, and one of the stops that we did was in Tulum, which is going to be a little underneath Cancun, just past that little circular, tiny little blip right before that. Yep. Should be right over there, Tulum. So I went with my family. We all enjoy history, art, all that kind of stuff. And so when we saw there was an excursion to do a ruins tour, we jumped at the opportunity. And it was super cool. We went to Tulum National Park, which is one of the largest parks that they have filled with ruins. And our guide was super awesome, super cool, so knowledgeable. He was telling us a lot about the Mayan people and kind of their way of life and how that led to the ruins that they have there. I'm pretty sure he said that just in that area of Mexico alone, there's like 800 different ruins. There's so many. Even just away from Tulum, going back to the port, we would walk past these tiny little fenced off areas, and you're like, oh, that looks just like rubble. But then you go a little closer and there's actually a plaque that says, hey, this is protected by the country, the country or the government. Like, this is actually an official ruin. And it was just absolutely everywhere. It was really cool to see how well preserved they have it. It was really, really nice. So if we go to
I'm going to get to the wider shot so we can see the. Here you are. Okay. So.
Yeah. So this is like one of the larger ones in the park that we were at. It was just kind of this massive circle with a bunch of them just everywhere, and they just created these paths around them where you can walk. It was really, really interesting to see. So this definitely could have been some kind of a temple. The Mayan people were very, very spiritual and religious, right? So they dedicated a lot of their time to their beliefs and to their faith. So they were doing a lot of sacrifices, worshiping, that kind of stuff. So I can definitely imagine that this would have been something of the sorts, just considering how big it is. It's really cool to see the rocks, the windows.
One of the things that's important to keep in mind is we're coming to this next week when we start to look more closely at the Americas, which is everything west of the Atlantic Ocean, because what's going to happen is that these thriving, rich, sophisticated cultures that existed in the Americas, where there were something like 80 million people, are going to be confronting the Europeans and others that we've been focusing on for the first time. And it's not going to be pretty. And a lot of this is going to be destroyed, and the people are going to disappear. So it's really important for us to at least have a sense right now, today, of how sophisticated and interesting the civilization there was in the Americas. But we're just going to touch on it, okay? So why don't you tell us a little bit about this one thing that you saw there that really is so cool?
Yeah, so this building in particular, if you go up to the top, those red splotches, those are handprints from the architect of whoever built this structure, temple, whatever it may be. In Mayan culture, what they would do is whoever designed and built the structures, they would cut open their hands and then mark the building with their bloodied handprints in order to signify like this building is sealed, right? The seal of approval, right? So it's really cool to see that even today you can still see it there. Me and Lon were talking about how obviously blood doesn't really last that long. So we're assuming that they did something similar to earlier humans, like maybe putting in some type of pigment or something mixing into it, and that would have allowed it to last longer. But even the one on this side, you can so clearly see the handprint. It is so cool to see that it's there and it's nice and preserved, and
It's the
it
claim.
goes to show, yeah, like this is ours.
This is ours. And I can't remember if this semester I've actually shown you the cave paintings in Lascaux in southern France, where we saw the human prints on the cave wall around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. Did I show you that at all? I may not have, because I've had to abbreviate some things. But back in Europe, we were doing something similar there too, with pigments, where we would put our hands into a kind of a red pigment on the ground. Maybe we did it with blood as well, and we would put those handprints right on the cave walls to declare that we had been there somehow. So are there any questions for Alex? I wish we could go into this more, but I really want to get through the Rome part of this today. But is there anything you'd like to ask Alex about her trip to Mexico, or what she saw? And good, we've got Noah who is ready. Go ahead and grab a microphone, okay? And I'm going to just fix my microphone too at the same time. So to do this, you turn it on, okay, and you talk like karaoke. So it has to be close to your mouth. Yeah.
Very close. Very close. Okay, just very quickly, I wanted to ask. So you've mentioned that you visited a lot of these Mayan ruins. And it's very interesting because I know that even quite recently, as in the past 50 years, there weren't many restrictions on who could visit these ruins. And there were tourists I know who were even climbing them and not treating them very well. So how different is it now? Are there protections? You mentioned, I can see that some of them are gated, I was able to see. So what was that like as a tourist looking around?
Yeah, no, it's a lot different actually. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but at least where I visited in this specific national park, they take it super serious. Before we were even let in, you have to go through a security checkpoint, and they search your person and your bag for plastic. Like just plastic they search you for. And then there's another round where it's like, okay, don't bring anything dangerous, but they have a whole checkpoint just for plastic, just to make sure that you're not going to litter or leave behind any garbage on these ruins, right? And they had like I don't want to say security, but like employees walking around making sure that people are like staying off the gated areas. And the gates, it's just rope, but like even the grass, because there are like wild animals in these places too, right?
Sure,
Like they told us, careful, there might be jaguars, you could see wild turkeys, like that kind of stuff. But even in those little grass areas, you put one foot in there and immediately it's like, get off, get out. Like you can't do that. You can't even like get crazy close. Like you have to stay way outside of the fence. It was really nice actually to see how much they care about keeping it nice and pristine, and how much
Yeah.
that kind of has evolved, and they're really taking good care of it. Yeah.
It's really nice to see that governments are putting a little bit more focus, at least in this region, but that bodes hopefully well for the rest of the ruins as well. Thanks. That's cool.
Definitely, yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Noah, for the question. I just want to say one thing, and then we'll move on. When a government or a country protects its history and makes those places that we see so almost real to the moment that once was, it hasn't been degraded. How did you feel when you got as close as possible as you could to something so ancient and important? Like what's happening to Alex at that point? Can you share that with us a little bit?
Honestly, it was a little bit just kind of mind-blowing to think about, you know what I mean? Like the amount of distance and time in between when this happened versus me standing here today with, you know, like I went on a plane, I went on a cruise ship, like all of that, like in comparison to what our tour guide is explaining to us, it's unimaginable, the jump that we have made as humans to go from such an ancient civilization to what we have today in terms of technology, all of that. And it was just really, really, really interesting to be able to almost step back in time.
Yeah.
And be like, wow, like this is how it was. It's really, really fascinating, honestly, and it's really, really cool. And I cannot wait to do this so much more.
There's so
in
many
the
places
future.
to see in
Yeah,
the world.
there's
Yeah.
so many
like,
places.
like Rome. I mean, has anybody here been to Italy? Raise a hand. To anybody in the cosmos yet been to Italy or
I
any of
wish.
those wonderful cities like Rome or Florence or Venice or Tuscany or any of the other? Well, then maybe you will soon after you hear Alex describing a little bit of an encounter with a Mayan ruin. There are all these beautiful ruins all over the world.
Ruzan said that someone in his family has. Someone in
Oh,
his
yes.
family been to Ruzan said that.
Razan, thanks. Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Razan, are you able to jump on your microphone just to get going in real time? Or if not, just tell us. Yeah,
Can you
great. Yeah, sure. Where was your family?
brother? He's been to Italy, Rome, and all of that stuff. So he sent me like a couple of photos from like the Colosseum and other Roman sites.
Yes,
So it was
yes.
excellent. He told me it was very hot, like in Italy, but the rest of the stuff, like Rome, it's like a very Asian city.
Sure. Well, you know what? You've just mentioned one of the most known and impressive structures that everybody knows called the Roman Colosseum. So why don't we stop there? And I'm going to start with Rome today with a digital reconstruction that you've never seen before of the Colosseum in Rome. You guys ready for this? So
Before we jump there, Lon,
Yeah, go,
I
Matt.
just noticed that Marco said that he has been somewhere too.
Marco, where? You can put it in the live chat if you want.
And while
That's fine.
he's
Yeah.
talking
Good,
about
Matt.
that, I went to Mexico for my aunt's wedding, and
Yes.
on one of the field trips my family went on, we went through an area of dilapidated buildings
Uh-huh. And
in
what was
Cancun.
in Cancun? Well, that's a well-known place. Well, listen, I'm going to stop this for the moment in terms of the trips, just because I want to make sure I can cover Rome. But thank you for sharing these pictures, a little bit of what it was like. And Mantha, maybe in another class, we can explore a bit more of how you felt when you were down there. But
Marco just tossed up that he's been to Rome,
Yep.
Florence,
Florence, Sorrento, Tuscany. Whoa, Marco, you've been to quite a few places. So you're going to like what I'm about to show. And okay, so thanks. Why don't you take the microphone with you in case we need to pass it around?
Sorry, I just have like
ahead,
a
yeah.
concluding
Sure.
kind of thing. The best way I can describe how I felt seeing this and how it feels to see any type of historical monument is it makes you feel overwhelmingly human. Overwhelmingly human. I felt very like small, but also significant, if that makes sense.
Well, now we've got some insight happening here. So let's make sure that Maya is on this. This is great. Small, but significant?
At the same time, yeah.
So this idea of overwhelmingly human is a bullseye in terms of what this course is about. Remember when I showed you the assignment sheet for the third assignment, the Michael Smith quote, "I have come to realize the importance of what it means to be human," and this is what the course can. So can you expand on this overwhelmingly human and why your encounter with history made you feel even more human? Very important. Go ahead.
It's a little difficult to put into words, but okay, I'm gonna do the best I can.
Try. Okay. Yeah.
So it just made me feel like even just the fact that it was so hot, it makes me think, wow, people at that time, they're experiencing the same heat that I'm experiencing now, the same climate, right? It just makes you feel very connected in a way, because at the end of the day, we are all humans, right? And it just puts into perspective how they, in a way, were just like us,
Just like us. Yeah.
so long ago. And it really makes you like, it makes you want to think in their mind, put yourself in their shoes, and try to imagine what it could have been like to do the things that they were doing, right? Live in the societies that they were living in, or the villages, or what it would have been like to even be in charge of a project like this. How would you even get appointed to do that in that kind of society, right? And it makes me feel small in the sense of, wow, I'm just one person in the grand scheme of things, and there's so many bigger things out there outside of me, outside of, you know, my life. Like, we all think we're the main character, right? But it's like with that. But then it also feels very large of like, wow, I, so many years after, am able to come back and still look at it. That's very significant. The fact that we have made it to this point where we have preserved something like this for so long. We have developed so much technology and advancement to, we can go back and appreciate our
Yes.
history like this. So it feels very, very big and small at the same
Yeah.
time. And it just makes you, it makes you really appreciate the human spirit and what we have been able to create and how we can continue to appreciate it.
That is fabulous, Alex. And I have to say, could we just give Alex a little bit of a hand for that? Because she's just done something. I'm going to
Thank you.
carry on, but that's excellent. Take the microphone. I want to continue with you on this, Alex. I'm not surprised that it would be Alex who would stand up here in front of a planet. This is what you're going to see on the recording. I'm always thinking when I'm teaching, like the television producer I used to be, because I used to produce a lot of television programs and had a company. And so I'm always thinking like a viewer. So I know what the recording is going to look like. And I have to think about that. And what students are going to see is a young woman standing in front of a planet talking about what it means to be overwhelmingly human in an articulate, passionate way. If there's anything that's going to give me hope about the generation that's coming to take charge of this world, it's when we see someone like Alex stand up and explain it that way. And I know all of you could do that too, could explain it that way if you're given the chance to. But I just want to point out something that maybe you don't see immediately, is that she just said something that's very important for us to understand about evolution too. Let me just explain. It may not be so noticeable. 200,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago is when we humans became what's called Homo sapien. That is, we became the structure that we acquired the same anatomy that we have now. Our brain size was the same. Our bodies were the same. Everything that you see now with me, with my hands out, my legs, my head, or out, the same. The only thing that has changed is culture. Alex was just saying she could feel like she was connected to, because of the heat and other things, the humans that lived hundreds of years ago. Well, she should, and we all should, because the fact is, they were us. The only thing that was different was they had a different lifestyle and a different culture. Other than that, everything was the same. And this is a very important thing to remember about the story this semester, in terms of recognizing that when we became human, truly human, the advancement in the world, the accelerating advancements in the world, have all been because of our culture, what we're doing, but our bodies are not changing. Maybe they will in time, but I love the fact that she was talking about how she felt close or closer to the people who lived. So let me take this as an opportunity now to jump into Rome, because Rome was a little bit further back than the Maya were, but not really. We're talking about, to some extent, the same period of time. But let me bring up something for you, and let me start the lecture today, and I can explain. I'm going to zip over on the map across the Atlantic, and I'm going to come over to the Mediterranean, okay, just north of Africa, because this is where so much of the story has been unfolding and will continue to unfold. This is the center of the Western world. This is where the Greco-Roman and then Chinese and Indian and African world, all connected, are eventually going to establish the kind of culture that's going to enable them to conquer the Americas when they go over there across the Atlantic. And a lot of this has to do with what we often say is that this part of the world, particularly the Greeks and especially the Romans, they acquired the ingredients of conquest. They developed the tools, the metal tools, they developed the military tactics, and they developed the kind of empire-like mindset that would result in them crossing the Atlantic, not caring at all about the people in the Americas, and all they cared about was conquest, getting their silver, getting their slaves, getting their tobacco, getting their sugar, getting their coca and coffee, and bringing it back to their part of the world to create an even wealthier civilization. So understanding something about how that conquest is going to unfold and how tragic it will be, that what Alex just showed us is the tip of the iceberg of a beautiful, expansive civilization in the Americas that's going to be largely destroyed. It's coming. So let me just start today with this story that we began to touch on last week, and that is the rise of Rome. Sure. What's that? Oh, let me go help Maya for a second. That's okay. Sometimes we have our little tech issue here, but we might have to say, okay. Let's see. Is it the pen? There? Oh, it won't move to the next one? Okay. Oh, it might be because it's at the end. So here we go. Just a second. We're going to save this, and we're going to start another one, okay? So we press save, and then that will take us to an extra little one. And while I'm doing this, I need about 30 seconds or so. Just think of things you might be interested in about the Roman Empire, and then I can answer questions momentarily. So we go to the Roll browser. Watch this, and that sometimes takes a moment, and we'll be able to open a new one. Okay. So let's see. This is a little slow. It's moving. Oh yeah, it's safe. Okay, good. So continue on. Okay, great. I love the fact that no matter what the tech issue is anymore, I can deal with it. It's taken years. I feel so smart, at 63 that I can deal with tech. And I just feel like I'm, able to manage in this tech world now. Okay, so the Mediterranean. Please look at the map. Jack, try and take a look at the map and look at that sea, because it's around this sea that so much has been happening so far, and now we are going to see something happen with the boot. All of you know of Italy, the Italian peninsula, as the boot. And essentially, when I teased last week about Julius Caesar and read to you from Plutarch, important historian and philosopher of that age, you learned that one of the most celebrated, feared, and written about and talked about warriors and generals in history was actually not the kind of strong man that you might often equate with this kind of powerful figure, but he struggled with some mental illness, epilepsy, and that it was well known that he would have these fits of epilepsy and headaches and other things. I simply just introduced you to a figure, Julius Caesar, who emerged out of Rome and is going to be a person who is going to represent maybe the most important part of the Roman world, which is Rome, a little city in about 600 BCE. It was just a little city, Rome. Gradually, over hundreds of years, it's going to conquer its neighbors all across Italy. And at that time, it will do it while it's what we call a republic. When Rome began to really emerge at that time, this is a few hundred years before Julius Caesar will emerge and will lead to this great transition when Rome will become a dictatorship and an empire. But when it started as this small city, what really was a turning point for it was when it killed its king. It did something in about 500 BCE, before the Common Era, that not many other societies had done. We had been so used to the idea of god kings being these figures, authoritarian figures that ruled so many different societies. But what these Romans did in this little city is they killed their king. And they established a group of men who would rule, who were voted into power. It wasn't a democracy yet, but it was on its way. And this was before even ancient Athens had entered its golden age with its democracy that I showed you about. So in a way, Rome, which is not far from Greece, as you can see, had already started to think democratically, but not quite. What I want to do now is I'm going to bring a little reconstruction in by a German digital arts company that's doing some great reconstructions of ancient Rome. And I'm going to jump ahead from that early period when Rome began to emerge from this little city, began to conquer its neighbors, and over hundreds of years, while it's a republic with no king, it's going to establish itself as the hegemon, we say, in the Mediterranean. And this is an important word for our notes. Does anyone know what hegemon means? Have you ever heard of the word hegemon? Hegemon? Jack, have you ever heard the word? I think last week you said there was something that I asked and you said you knew, and then I didn't actually come to you. What did I ask? Because I want to make sure I answer your question. What did I ask last week? That's right. That's right. And you knew. Yeah, okay, good. Do you know what hegemon means? Okay. So Jack was the only one last week who knew about this detail of Julius Caesar, which shows that he's got some real historical knowledge going on in there. Hegemon means the dominant power. The hegemon. Who's the big ruling power right now, the dominant power in this particular world we call the hegemon. And we say today, for example, for better or for worse, that the United States is the global hegemon. So Rome had established itself as the hegemon of the Mediterranean. And by the time it begins to build this Colosseum that you're about to see and begins to create a metropolis in Rome, through its military spirit, similar to what the Athenians had done. People in Athens, in the democracy of Athens, wanted to fight for Athens. They weren't ordered to. They wanted to fight because they believed in the spirit of Athens. Well, it's in the same vein that the Romans, who were gradually joining this growing hegemon in Italy, as Rome began to conquer its neighbors and remain somewhat free, the people it conquered would want to fight for Rome because they liked this culture, which was a little bit freer, which made becoming part of their civilization kind of a privileged position to become a citizen of Rome. So they established a growing force of what are called the Roman legions. And the Roman legions began to create this hegemon in the Mediterranean. And they did it when they essentially won a very important war against Carthage. It's called the Punic Wars. And Carthage was a city on the northern part of Africa in here. And some of you may have heard of Hannibal, the great Carthaginian general who almost defeated the Romans. He's the one that took the elephants over the hills and gradually brought them towards Rome and eventually confronted Rome, but would be defeated. He's one of the most important and military geniuses in history. He was Carthaginian. He almost defeated Rome, but when the Romans defeated him in about 200 BCE, that was a galvanizing moment for Rome to become even stronger. They had just defeated a very important adversary. So I'm kind of setting the scene for this moment now. And let me come to here. I'm just having a little trouble with this, but it's this footage that I want to show you here. And it is, I have it teed up for you, and it is right here. And it is, there we go. So I'm going to run this silently. This is the Roman Colosseum. About 200 years AD or CE, so it's a little bit later than the period I'm talking about, but it was built many years earlier, and there's probably no structure in human history that has been so captured the human imagination as the Roman Colosseum. I'm going to show you many things about the city of Rome in a moment, but just take a look at this place as you enter it. This would have been in 248 AD, but it could have been even hundreds of years earlier. How many of you have seen the movie, I'm sure you have or know of, gladiatorial combat, gladiators fighting in the Roman Colosseum? Sure, you've heard of this, and the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe also documents this period in history. But essentially, it's important to understand that to be part of the Roman world at this time, just get rid of this. It should go in a moment, but maybe not. I'll just leave it there. Rome, by the period that I'm talking about, just around 2,000 years ago, here it is, the Colosseum, a sort of a wider view of it, set in Rome. It was the principal structure in a city that had about 1 million people. And no city had ever had that many people anywhere in human society yet. Ancient Babylon, for example, had about 1/3 of that. There had been a city in India, I think it was called Panat, that had hundreds of thousands. But Rome, 2,000 years ago, had about 1 million people. And they would come together for events that were really filled with so much drama. For example, in the Colosseum, which is what you're looking at, this was the principal theater where people would gather, about 60,000 would come and sit, and they would watch all sorts of entertainment that would be presented to them. And some of the things, of course, that were presented were the gladiatorial combat, in which there were men, often slaves, who were the kind of rock stars of the day. And they would be trained to be able to enter this arena in front of thousands of people. They would engage in combat, often with very little to protect them. They were warriors, and they were celebrated as warriors. And in that arena, they would fight to the death. And it wasn't only the gladiatorial combats that would take place here, but there were all sorts of other incredible pageants of animals that would be brought in from exotic parts of the world, hippopotamus and giraffe and rhinoceros, and thousands of animals that would be brought in and would be slaughtered, or they would fight each other in front of the crowds. The Romans were civilized, but they were violent. They celebrated violence, and it's not something we do much anymore, but it's important to understand this point, that they saw themselves as incredibly tough people. Now, I want to just stop this for a second and come back to a little bit more of what we can see in Rome that's even more interesting. This is a reconstruction of the Rome. I'm going to just have to hold this for a second. This is a reconstruction of the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum was a bustling market. Sorry, guys, I just want to make sure this is working. I'll stay still for a second. The Roman Forum was probably the most central part of the Roman city, because this is where people would come together, similar to what we saw in the Acropolis in ancient Athens, just beneath. Hold on, I think I'm going to have to come to this so it doesn't. Okay, so everything good in the Cosmos? Can you hear me clearly on this microphone? Great. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm going to come back to the Roman Forum shortly, but I just want to introduce you to something you've never seen yet in anything in human society, and that is this sophisticated urban world. The giant city. We all live in cities now. There's been a large migration over many centuries of people from the farmland, from the country, into the cities. The Romans were the first ones that created this very bustling metropolis. And I want to read to you something today. I brought a book in from my library as well, called Cities and Civilization. It's a heavy book. It took Peter Hall, a British scholar, something like 15 years to write this. And there's some wonderful descriptions of daily life in ancient Rome that I'd like to read, so that you can understand just how intense it was to live in this place, and how rough it could be, and how these qualities made Rome into the powerhouse that it became. It became the first real superpower in human history. But let me just come back and bring it back to Julius Caesar and the story of what happened with the beginning of its decline. Okay, so here we go. All right. So you should have just a little bit of a sense now of something that was happening in the Roman world that was different from all other areas and societies that we've been looking at so far. And I want you to just take a look at the map for a moment, okay? And then I'm going to come back to what you're looking at, which is a slave market and slavery, and how important slavery was. But first, you see the Mediterranean Sea. Today, if you go to Europe, you would go and you would see all these different countries around Europe. France, for example, you see Greece, you'd see Italy, you'd see Turkey, you see along the northern part of Africa, you would see Morocco, Tunis, and others. When Rome became the power it was 2,000 years ago, when it gradually was ascending to become this superpower, and it had burst out of Italy after it conquered its neighbors in its own city and gradually established itself as the dominant power in Italy. And then it began to expand across the Mediterranean, defeating Carthage, for example, in the Punic Wars in northern Africa and elsewhere. It gradually established an empire around the Mediterranean, one empire, one place. So all those countries today, France, Italy, Greece, all those countries, imagine if they're all one country. Those countries, those kingdoms, those places I've just described are eventually going to emerge as what we call Europe. That's coming after Rome declines. Rome had all of this land. In fact, Rome extended eventually all the way up to Britain, to the United Kingdom, and will go all the way to the eastern part of the Mediterranean, and it will have its own language, one language, Latin. Any city you would go to around the Mediterranean at that time would have the Colosseum, they'd have their baths, they'd have their aqueducts, they would have their markets, their forums. So just imagine if you were to go to Europe today, you would be used to going to many different countries. It was all one empire, the Roman world, one language, Latin. Eventually, when that is all going to collapse and fragment, Latin is going to also fragment into new languages like French and Italian, Greek. These are the Romance languages. They come after Rome. So the impact of Rome, the impact of Latin, the impact of even its legal system can be felt today. However, we have a problem. In about 3 weeks, I'm going to be bringing to you a chapter in the story called Humanity's Stain. And that is the story of slavery. And essentially what you're going to learn is that no matter how much human society has progressed, and how much you might see in the power of Rome as being something amazing, there's a reality here that has been there in every human society, and that is slavery. And we're not going to deal with slavery, or what I call humanity's stain, until much later, in hundreds of years. So Rome, without slaves, would not have happened. Greece, without slaves, would not have happened. How did slavery work in the Roman world? Well, let's take a look at this picture. It's a fairly famous painting. You see a slave owner sitting on the edge of a platform, kind of dramatically. This is how he's been painted, kind of greedily eating something. And you see behind him people who have been captured by the Roman legions in different parts of the Mediterranean and elsewhere, and have been brought back to Rome as slaves. This slave owner was the capitalist of the day. He was the big businessman of the day, the Roman businessman who would make a lot of money from selling the slaves to people. And if you had some money, you would come to a slave market and you would look at, well, do I want that child? Do I want that big strapping guy there? Do I want that woman who's sort of crouched? And what about all those strapping black people that we just got from Africa and brought back? Well, maybe they could also help do the tough work in our world. Imagine today, just imagine if you walked into, let's say, a Costco, No Frills, or something more sophisticated like Whole Foods. And you come around an aisle, and instead of food there's just all these people being displayed. And you can buy them. You buy them from somebody, and you take them home with you. And they do all the work that you want done in your home and on your land. This is how it was done. Rome as a society was very unequal. Even though it had killed its king, even though it had established the beginning of a democracy, it wasn't like what we have today. The people who had the power were ruling families. They did the voting. They were called the patricians. And most people lived in squalor or poverty or lived in slavery. So, yes, we are seeing the opening of something that there's a bit of democracy, but not much. So, slavery was essential to give it the power that it had. What started to happen in the Roman world as we begin to start to look at the seeds of its demise, the beginning of its downfall? It's slow, but it's going to happen. What I'm about to show you are some of the things that start to weaken the society, not strengthen it. For example, how many of you know of the very famous gladiator in Roman history named Spartacus? Ever heard the name Spartacus? Spartacus, I'm sure you have. Well, this is an image taken from a television series about Spartacus that was done in Europe. Spartacus was one of the slaves, one of the gladiators who organized his other peers in gladiatorial training school or camp where he was, and he organized them to confront the Roman elite, to confront the Roman rulers. In other words, he was staging a rebellion to bring liberty and fairness and justice and to end slavery in Rome. And he led a revolt against the Roman elite at that time. He wasn't the only one. It's a fascinating story because as he organized this group and they broke out of their gladiatorial training camp and they took kitchen knives with them from the kitchen, and there were about 500 of these men, they gradually moved towards Rome, and they were going to take over Rome and overthrow the patricians there. They confronted Marcus Licinius Crassus. This is him. This is a little sculpture that was done of him to give you a sense of what he might have looked like. This was sculpted at the time that Crassus was alive. He was one of the wealthy slave owners at that time. Why is he important to Julius Caesar? I'm getting to that. He's going to fund Julius Caesar's campaign. So I'm gradually kind of laying the groundwork for you to understand how it is that somebody like Julius Caesar is about to come to power, and he's going to declare himself dictator for life. And he's going to be assassinated for that. It's a very important moment in Roman history, but he couldn't have done it without somebody like Marcus Licinius Crassus. And Spartacus and his men had to deal with Crassus's forces. Crassus organized a defense of Rome against Spartacus, and they lost. They were defeated by the great Roman legions. What Crassus did, along with the others that he was ruling with at the time, after he defeated Spartacus and his men, he took all those who had supported Spartacus, because by that time there were thousands that had come around Spartacus as he moved towards Rome, eventually confronting Crassus. Many more people joined that revolution. But when it was crushed, Crassus and others took those who were still alive. It's a very famous thing, and the image, just imagine this. Imagine if you were walking along Simcoe Avenue or Taunton or Thixon, and what you see, as far as your eye can see, on the left and the right-hand side of the road are all these people strung up and crucified, dripping with blood, bodies dying, and they will remain there for months, their bodies rotting. Imagine if you saw that. Just walking. This is what was done to the surviving fighters of Crassus's army, of Spartacus's army. They were crucified in the thousands. And they were strung up on the main road called the Appian Way, the great road that would come into Rome as a warning to anybody who would want to stage another revolution like this. This is what's going to happen to you. Crucifixion was the way that Romans executed people. As you see this image here, you probably and you should make an association with Jesus of Nazareth, because that's what's about to come. Jesus of Nazareth was executed Roman style. He lived in a Roman province. So it's important for you to understand that this form of execution was the way the Romans did it. But this moment when Spartacus and his men were strung up as a warning to others is a very important moment in human history, because it tells us that when revolutions are mounted against the powerful and the rich, who may have very good armies to protect them, it can be very risky for those who are staging the revolution. Julius Caesar emerged as a general around this time. In about the last century before the Common Era. You see him here in a moment that kind of expresses a little bit of his character. The person on the horse is not Julius Caesar. That's Vercingetorix. That's the leader of Gaul. Gaul will eventually become France. Gaul was the great mortal enemy and adversary of the Romans, and Vercingetorix was considered a very powerful and capable warrior, in the same way that Hannibal had been. Julius Caesar defeated him. Julius Caesar captured him. And this is a very famous painting that shows that Julius Caesar, who had emerged as this capable, skilled, brave general who is winning battle after battle, he will have to decide Vercingetorix's fate. And what happened is very interesting as a result of this moment. Vercingetorix will be taken back to Rome. Julius Caesar will have determined that instead of killing Vercingetorix or simply capturing him and bringing him to Rome and keeping him as a prisoner, he's going to do what the god kings always love to do. And this is where we begin to see something about the Roman world that is so fascinating. In spite of its advancement, its conquests, its killing of its own king, its kind of flirtation with democracy, it eventually begins to swing back to the very thing that it wanted to get away from. It killed the king. It wanted to be something freer. But now watch what happens. Julius Caesar brings Vercingetorix back to Rome. And in front of all the Romans who gathered in the forum that you saw a little bit of the digital reconstruction, he's going to bring all the Romans into the forum. He's going to come into the forum on that day with Vercingetorix, and his face will be painted purple. He wants to be seen as a kind of god, and that's why he painted his face purple at that moment. And he's going to sit in front of all the Romans while Vercingetorix is brought in front of him. And as the Romans look at him, thinking that he's a god-like figure now, this face painted, just won this great battle, saved Rome from this terrible enemy, he's going to execute Vercingetorix in front of everybody. imagine if a leader that you're familiar with, somebody that you have heard about, who has been such a terrible threat to your world, Vercingetorix, is now brought before you, and the person giving the command to execute him is sort of has his face painted, and he's this great Julius Caesar who's won this battle, and now that person is giving the order to kill Vercingetorix. You would feel, unless you were educated, which you weren't, you would feel like Julius Caesar seems to have some kind of extra power here, some kind of divine power. He was able to defeat our enemy. He's killed him now in front of us. As a result of that execution and what was to follow, Julius Caesar felt sufficiently confident to say to the Romans, I want to be your dictator for life. So essentially what's happening now at this moment in history is a person had emerged as an important military figure. He'd won important battles. He's established himself in front of his own people as something more than human. And now he's saying, I want to be your ruler for life. This had never happened in the Roman world. And there were many who thought, how could he, in spite of all his victories, want to become the king? We executed the king. We established something different, the Republic. Why would we want a king again? It's a very important question. The reason it's important for you to think about this question now is because we're living at a time of democracy in the world. We think it's going to last. But at the same time, through the story of Julius Caesar and what happened, we're going to see in a moment that we humans, through this story, may not want democracy at all. We may want our authoritarian figure. We call this the totalitarian temptation. I want to give this term for all of you to understand, okay? And it might help you to understand when you look at the world today and you see in so many countries, including the United States, all these strong men emerging with militaries and people who follow them. And you will have to reflect on this idea, because here is what happened with the story of Julius Caesar. I'll come to the cosmos in a moment. I need to finish this content, and we'll come to that. Okay. And I'll read this a little bit later if I can, but I need to make sure you understand this critical point. World history turns on this stuff, and on this precise moment. The statue you're looking at is not Julius Caesar. Do you know who that is? Does anybody know who that? And that was sculpted at the time that he was alive, this person. Let's see if anybody makes this connection. This person will emerge as the first emperor of Rome. And it wasn't Julius Caesar. Does anybody know who this was? Anybody in the cosmos? Alex? No, Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher and a well-known philosopher of particularly Stoicism. He wasn't at this high level of political leadership. There was Mark Antony. That's something different. Victor? Yes, it is. It's Julius Caesar's adopted son. Do you know what his name was? Augustus. Do you know what his name was before he took on the name Augustus that's become our month August? And our month July is Julius Caesar. So our summers, are actually July and August are named after these two figures, Julius Caesar, July, or the Julian dynasty, and August for Augustus. Okay, so Octavian was his name. This bit of information I'm going to tell you now is the kind of fulcrum on which the whole story turns. Why would Rome have an emperor after Julius Caesar emerged as a wannabe emperor, a dictator? He wanted to be the first dictator for life, and then he was assassinated by his peers, other senators. He was stabbed to death in the Roman political chamber. And it was said that he was killed because these senators did not want to have a dictatorship. But then, and this is remarkable, Rome turned around and became a dictatorship. And his adopted son, Octavian, who then took the name Augustus, became the first Roman emperor and the first in a long line of emperors, some of whom you may be familiar with, people like Caligula and Nero and others who were very mentally unfit, very cruel and diabolical and violent. But essentially what's going to happen to Rome is going to go back to being a kind of a monarchy, a king, but it will be even more than that. All power will rest now to such an extent there will be a cult of personality and worship that will develop around the emperors that will come. And so the critical idea here that I would like you all to think about for the moment is, why would a great civilization in history that had established its power to a large extent on the fact that it was not a monarchy, it was a republic, why would it then turn back to that monarchy and become a dictatorship? You don't have to answer that. But the question you have to ask yourself is it possible that in our world today, where we're living in a time of greater freedom, that we might do as the Romans did and turn back to the cult of personality, to the strong men who we think will bring us security, peace, no more war, who will fight wars because they say it will bring us peace. And we will trust them. We will trust what they say. We will see the reemergence of the spell of the God King. Could it happen to us? I'd like you to think about that. But I want to bring you some hope. I want to help you to understand that actually humans are better than that. And we have the story of Rome to help us with that. Here is the ultimate crucifixion, the ultimate execution, the one that the world today is haunted by and inspired by, provided that you are a follower of Jesus. But it's the biggest religion in the world. 2.5 billion, maybe 3 billion people consider themselves Christians in the world. Christianity is the principal global religion. Everywhere you go, it is universal. And its image, as we all know, is the cross. In fact, today, just to show you how sometimes It feels like we're living in a bit of a time warp. You can turn on your website, television, watch a press conference being held by the pretty young Miss America, who is Donald Trump's, Secretary of Communications. You ever see the nice, pretty blonde woman who speaks for Donald Trump? He has all these blonde women around him because he once was the host of the Miss America pageant. Do you know that? So he loves to have, you take a look at all the women. They're all young, blonde, with long, blonde, straight hair. And the current one, who's the director of communications, who speaks for him, she wears a nice cross on her. She's a good Christian. In fact, others in his orbit now do this too. But that's another story about how religion starts to get in the way of politics. The point is, maybe the most important person in history, maybe the most important idea in history is Christianity. Maybe. If you're a Jew like me, you might say no. But we have to acknowledge, if you're a Hindu, you're a Sikh, you're a Buddhist, you're a Muslim, you're a Zoroastrian, you're indigenous, or you're a Jack, you might say no. No, Jesus is not my guy. But 3 billion people on this planet of 8 billion follow him. There's no other religion that comes close. In all its denominations, Christianity breaks down into Roman Catholicism that came out of the Roman world. That's the beginning of the Pope. That's Roman Catholicism. Then there's Protestantism, there's baptism, there's Anglicanism, and there's so many denominations, but it all comes back to this, Jesus of Nazareth. Well, why did he emerge? Well, it has a lot to do with the corruption of the Roman world that we just saw, at least introduced. When Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, and Rome entered this period of, very, very dangerous civil wars between Augustus and Mark Antony and Cleopatra in Egypt and others, and eventually Augustus emerged as the ruler and the emperor of this new Rome and convinced the senators and others to see him as the emperor in a backwater province in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. Here's Rome. Let's go all the way over here. Right here too. You see Lebanon, Damascus. We're coming back to Mesopotamia again a little bit. We're right around here where Israel is now. This was all Roman territory, Roman provinces, poor Roman provinces. There were men then preaching in that part of the world to save the people from the Romans, to save them from the oppression of the Roman legions, to save the people from cruelty and killing. We call them messiahs. Now, what I'm about to say is a little bit controversial, but I'm going to try and be as matter of fact and always scholarly as I can. Among the Christians here who are very, very serious about their religion, Jesus is the only Messiah. There's nobody else that could have done what he has done. He is it. He is the Son of God, brought down to earth to save us. That's what the Christians say. The facts are, from a historical standpoint, that at this time in the Roman province, there were many people preaching, saying, we must do something different here. We must save ourselves from Roman oppression, from Roman dictatorship, and we must create a new world for ourselves. We must fight this. And I am your Messiah. I will help you do that. There were many like that. Jesus was one of them. But so powerful was this idea that the messiahs were bringing, that people started to be drawn to them, to follow them. Now, I want to stop for a moment. Make sure that we all understand, what is the dominant idea at the heart of Christianity? Why would the Romans want to execute Jesus, crucify him? It's very important, because actually this will give us hope, will tell us something about why, in spite of how violent the Roman dictatorship became, and despite how discouraging it is to see the Romans reverting back to the very thing that they wanted to get away from, which is the king. Something else happened during that time that is very much a part of our lives today. And it's at the heart of the Christian message. It's at the heart of what made Jesus so dangerous. It's at the heart of what makes this religion today so universal. What do you think that idea is? Let's see if Maya, do you want to give Maya the microphone? What might that idea be?
Love thy neighbor.
Love first, yes. Love thy neighbor. Go on. What else?
One may love themselves.
Keep going. You're on it.
That's all I know. Sorry.
Okay, let's keep. We're not quite there yet. We've seen Rome go back to the God King, meaning that the most important person is a human who seems to be divine. Yet, there is this religion that has emerged, grown out of the Israelites and Abraham and Moses and others. And in those religions, is the human the most important? No, it's God. Remember God? Remember I introduced that idea of how Abraham brought that idea of one God, a transcendent vision that the human had. Abraham, a transcendent vision of a single God set above nature. This is what Abraham brought, and this is what Jesus preached. He said, that emperor, mocking him, he's just a human like everybody else. I'm not going to worship Augustus. I'm not going to worship Trajan or Nero or Caligula or anybody else. That's why when he is crucified, he's wearing a crown of thorns, because the emperor would wear a crown like that too, but it wasn't thorns. It was precious jewels. It was the crown of the Roman emperor. But he was crucified for challenging the power of the emperor and saying, the emperor is not powerful, only God is. And so his killers, who crucified him to mock him, said, oh, really? You think the emperor is not so powerful? Here, wear this crown when we nail when we put the nails into your hands, just to show the world that actually the emperor is important here and you're just a wannabe emperor. You wear the crown of thorns. You know what the idea is? I know it's going to sound so simple to all of you, and you're going to go, I can't believe Lon's saying this. Equality. What he was preaching as a result of the oppression in the Roman world, he was saying that beneath the God set above nature, the one God, we are all his children. We are all equal The blind man, the sick boy, the woman and who's had a stillborn child, the suffering. They even have more grace and nobility than the highest emperor. But they're all equal. We're all humans. We're all humans before this one God. That idea, actually, is going to become the beginning of human rights. Now, I'm not saying that human rights is a Christian idea per se. All religions have a sense of this idea of you love your fellow human. But because Jesus was killed in the way he was, so publicly, and because there were Jews following him, Jesus was Jewish, but he was a rebel. There were people like Saul, for example, one of his principal disciples, who will become Paul, who will convert to Christianity. He will begin to preach over the next 200-300 years around the Roman world about this idea that Jesus died for. And eventually, there will be a Roman emperor 300 years later named Constantine who is going to adopt Christianity as the faith and religion of the whole Roman world. And that's going to change history forever. Constantine, the Roman emperor, who claimed that in a battle to seize the dictatorship of Rome, Julius Caesar-like. The night before that battle, he claimed, and so it's written, he saw a cross above a bridge, shining. Already in his court, quite a few people had converted to Christianity. This was after 200-300 years in which Christians were slaughtered, killed in the Roman Colosseum for entertainment. But so powerful was this idea that came from Jesus and others that eventually Constantine's court and Constantine himself will say, all Romans should now become Christian. Had I not seen that cross on the eve of my battle in which I won, that brought me to the position of emperor, had I not had that vision of the cross over a bridge, I would not have won this battle. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Christianity. Now let us become Christendom, the power of Europe. And this is going to change so much of the world. So much of this is a result of Rome and what Rome represented. But I'm going to stop here to make sure that I stop myself. I've talked quite a bit. There are things I haven't shown, but you have the essential idea. And let's just stop for 2 or 3 minutes to review, and then we'll conclude the class. To help Maya, in the cosmos or here, what is today's essential idea? I'm ending Spells of Our God Kings today with this story. I'm moving into a new chapter called A Greater World next week. But what is, would you say, the takeaway in this final chapter of Spells of Our God Kings? The final chapter of Spells of Our God Kings. What would be the essential idea or two that Maya could write in the notes? Let's think for a moment. Great. Okay. I'm gonna keep this on. Further autonomy of humans. Not bad. Roseanne, could you jump on your microphone and tell us what you mean by that? Further
So
autonomy
if you
of humans.
if you look at civilizations, and I'm saying like since like the Stone Age till now, you see the rate of individualism in people has increased. So if you see like during the times of the god kings or like the Babylonian, Mesopotamian times, you had to consider your god, sorry, your king as everything. So you needed to die for your king, you needed to worship him and stuff.
That's right.
But
That's right.
as humans went on, they further like came to the realization that the self is the most important thing, and they came with ideas, further philosophies that then like developed into human rights or whatever we have today.
Yes, yes.
So that's my take on this.
It's a very good take. As a matter of fact, I'm going to help you with a beautiful line from a historian and scholar whom I have quoted before, named Alfred North Whitehead. And he talks about the slow sunrise of civilization. The slow sunrise of civilization on planet Earth. Civilization on planet Earth and the slow sunrise, he means that there has been a slow progression, but very slow, towards something better for the human. And what that better thing is yes, autonomy. Yes, is the self. But even more simply, liberty, freedom. That, Victor, you don't need a priest. You don't need a god. You don't need a king to make any decisions. You just need your critical thinking. You just need your common sense. You just need your creativity. You just need your brain concentrating on solving a problem. You don't need anybody above you, any authority, anything to tell you what to do. You are perfectly capable of mastering your own destiny. Does that make sense, Victor? Take the microphone. Okay, good. I just want to make sure you get this. This is good, okay? I might not have said it quite right, and you might be misunderstanding, but hold on. So this idea of the slow sunrise is we're moving towards the fact that humans don't need authority figures to tell them how to live. They just need themselves.
Yeah, but they might not be capable. That's what I'm saying.
Why?
Well, because when you think that you're know-it-all, you're very prone to making mistakes. And if you don't have like an extra support, or like somebody else who might not be like in the same state of mind as
Sure.
you, to kind of like maybe give you different ideas to like things that you might be doing wrong, or like where you might be straying off
Yeah,
towards
yeah.
and stuff. And
That's good.
if you're all on your own, then I think that it's very easy to make like mistakes because you think that you're right, but in reality, say you're not.
Well, you know what? I think we're saying the same thing. All you're talking about is that you're going to learn, you're going to seek support. But in the end, it's Victor that's going to make the decision, not somebody else, right?
Well, the decision, yeah.
That's critical. Whenever decisions get made, that's when action happens. So whoever makes the decision, whoever is the decider in chief, is the ruler. If you're making the decision for your own life, you're the ruler of your life, right?
Okay, I agree with that.
Does that make sense now? But the good ruler that you are, the smart person that you are, you will say, as you have, but I don't know. I'm going to go learn. I'm going to go seek support. And then in the end, I, Victor, I'm my own God. I'm my own priest. I'm my own king. I decide, right?
I don't disagree with that. I'm not my own God, but I do have the power of free will to make my own decisions.
Exactly. That's the slow sunrise. You have the power. In the past, you didn't.
Yeah, that's right. But everybody has their own free will to make their own decisions. Those decisions may be influenced, but at the end, you're still making your own decisions.
And don't you always want to be in that position where you would be making those decisions, not having somebody put their thumb in your forehead and say, Victor, you need to do this?
Yeah, of course. That's what free will comes down to. But sometimes you might need those people if you're not thinking straight, for example.
Okay, great. Good
The
stuff.
decision, like at the end of the day, that its decision is yours. The free will, it's yours.
That's right. Had you been living in Rome during the time of Augustus and other emperors, the decisions would not have been yours. Had you been living in the time of, let's say, Gilgamesh and ancient Ur or Uruk, or you've been living in the time of King Ramses in ancient Egypt, the decisions wouldn't have been yours. You would have had to fall into line.
Right.
Okay, good. Okay, so good. Malachi, go ahead, Malachi.
This reminds me of like a couple of weeks ago when I said I'll die for Christianity. It's really a privilege to even be able to say that, especially since in some countries like Nigeria where Christians are being persecuted. So it's a privilege that I'm able to have the free will to make the choice while other people, especially children, are like being set in front of their church, seeing it being burnt down or seeing their family members being killed. So that's why I also like the quote that you said, because it shows free will is about freedom of choices. Like the guy previously just said,
Yes.
we have influences, but influences can only bring you a certain way, while free will allows you to make the decision to actually do it.
That's right. And I think we want to live in a society where we will always have our free will and we can act on our free will. That's very important. Just to have the free will, Victor, inside of you is not enough. You have to be able to act on it, and then you're free or freer. Otherwise, you're a slave. We're going past our time, but I want to make sure everyone. Jack, is there anything you want to add? You good? Okay, Maya's got this. We're going to end very shortly, okay? Let's let Noah speak, and if there's anything any of you in the Cosmos would like to say, please just put it in the live chat, and I will save it and bring it up next week. But we're going to conclude with Noah, and maybe Maya may want to say, do you want to say anything, or are you good? Okay, or Alex? But we're getting close to the end here, okay? Noah, yeah, please go ahead.
No, I just really like Victor's insight because he does raise a fair point, and it's great and valuable, I think, to look at the further autonomy of humans. That is a progression that we move and we have been moving towards through many, many centuries and even longer of civilization. But it's true, and I think it's reasonable to question it as well, because I mean, you can look at all of history, and if at any given point in history, every individual had perfect 100% free will, there would never have been progression. And I mean, there's a lot of history that is bad, that is wrong, that we've looked at. I mean, we've looked at slavery and these things. The world would be a different place, and we can't say definitively that any one thing is good or bad, especially as our perspective on this changes over time. But I think it's good to also question free will because and the reason is because no, humans are imperfect, and so there is value also in looking at civilizations and their leaders and the goal. So I think further autonomy of humans, the goal is to progress eventually towards perfect rule, somewhere where we aren't yet, and we will hopefully someday get to. But I just thought that your insight was good. That was cool.
It's interesting that Noah mentions, because there are fundamental conflicts in religions, as you know, and one of the great conflicts between the Jew and the Christian, even though they're both brothers in the sense that they come from Abraham, the Abrahamic faith, the Jew will say the Messiah has yet to come. The Christians say the Messiah has come. So as a Jew, I can say to you, I don't believe in Jesus. I can talk about Jesus and tell you about what I know and give you the history, and I respect that. But do I, speaking as a Jew, I'm not a very good Jew at all. I'm not very religious, but I understand the history. Do I believe in this idea that the person came from God and he's here and the Messiah has come? No. And that is a source of great tension between the Christian and the Jew, if you get down to it, because the Christian will say, but Jesus is the Messiah. He's here. He's saved. He's got what God wanted. And the Jew says, no, going to come later. World's not ready yet.
And
So-
that's what's so fascinating about history as well, because so much of history and civilization, it's all happenstance. It's, oh, you know, this person praising this religion, following these ideas, these beliefs, this person happened to come into power and influence things this way. And the world may have been different if something happened. We can always speculate, but that is history. That is what makes it so fascinating. Looking at when you have, say, an emperor that says, oh, we're going to follow this religion, and what influence that has, looking at which Messiah, you know, may have been the one that had this influence and did that is what's so fascinating, looking at older history and the presence of religion within it.
It's just finally, just write this on the board. Alfred North Whitehead wrote a book called Adventures of Ideas. Adventures. He said history, when you look at it, it's just all about the different ideas that humans follow or don't follow based on whatever happens. So everything is ideas. But how those ideas become regimes, how we end up following democracy or God King or Islam or Judaism, that's another sort of tale. But it's all about what's in our heads and what we choose to follow, Victor, in the end. That's it. Adventures of Ideas. That's the narrative. Anyways, okay. We need to end. I need to let you go. Excellent comments. Victor, Malagai, Noah, thank you very much. Maya's note, Jack, Alex, for a bit of Mayan civilization. We're going to see more of that next week. Ryden, and for all of you in the Cosmos, please put any final comments there. I'll save it. I look forward to your final assignments or your second assignments next week. Okay? Have a good week, everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye. Here you